There's a conversation that I've had with more founders than I can count, and it usually starts like this. I have a great team. Clients still really want to talk to me. My team is sharp, but they can't seem to say it the way I say it. I'd delegate more if I trusted that they could carry the message. And I get it. I understand it. You've built this business through your insight, your intuition, your hard work, and your level of excellence and expertise can't be faked. It makes sense that clients, partners, internal team, everybody wants to defer to you. And it's because you're the source of clarity. You're the source of strength. You're the source of confidence. And that's great. But at a certain point in growth, that reliance on you becomes unsustainable, not just internally, but out in the marketplace. You have unintentionally become the bottleneck, not because of your ego, not because you want it to be a know it all, but because of the absence of a transferable system of trust and expertise from your experience, your brain, your know how through the rest of your organization. And here's what I want to address in this final episode of this series, and that is how do we actually scale trust? How do we do the work of unpacking your expertise into a model that scales, not in theory, but in practice? Let's start with why this problem exists. Even when you've hired well and you have great processes, great SOPs, and you're doing significant revenue, perhaps in the millions, most founders think trust is personal and can't be transferred. I've had these conversations now almost for 15 years. And that is partially true. But when a client trusts you, they're responding to your years of demonstrated expertise, consistent judgment, and proven results. And that's commendable. You just can't hand that over to someone else and expect it to transfer automatically. Now, you have some of that in your organization because you wouldn't have gotten where you are without it. But there's something that seems to be at a little bit of a plateau and you're trying to get over the hump, especially in this modern era of marketing. Things just don't sound the way that you would say it. Things just don't seem to come across with the right message that you'd like. But here's the distinction that most people miss. Trust isn't really transferred. It's created through structured conditions. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. When a client trusts you, and I know in my experience over the last 34 years, when a client says they trust me, they really trust that it's not me, my personality, or me personally as a human. They trust three things. They trust my experience and expertise to diagnose their problem properly. They trust my judgment to come up with the right solution for their situation. And they trust my commitment to see it through to their realized goal. So it's what's interesting is those three things, expertise, judgment, and commitment, those actually can be transferred, but not through delegation by building out SOPs and systems, but through an infrastructure. And that's the shift that most founders miss that I want to talk to you about in this final video in this series. If you want trust to scale beyond you, you've got to have three conditions in place. In my opinion, condition number one is the shared strategic foundation. This is something we've talked about in an earlier episode, and that is how do we get your frameworks, positioning, and beliefs that guide your thinking so that your team operates from the same foundational or strategic foundation that you do. They're not guessing what you'd say. They're not guessing what the right answer is. They're not mimicking you. They're actually thinking the way you think because they have access to the same frameworks. In practice, what this could look like potentially is your sales teams diagnosing client problems using your frameworks. Your marketing team is communicating online, on your website, on your social, and your ads from your positioning that's clear without running to you every time there needs to be a change in the campaign. Your ops team's making decisions based on the documented principles. And again, some people say, Darrell, what's the difference between SOPs and what you're talking about? Well, what we're talking about here is the transference of the ability for someone to execute at the same level of confidence that you would, not just simply check the box. Okay. What we want to say here is we need to approach this from a place where the team doesn't run to you, the founder, and say, let me check with Mike, let me check with Steve, let me check with Mary, right? Whoever the founder might be. They say, here's how we approach this with confidence because they're operating from the shared foundation. Now, condition number two, in my experience, is where I've gotten stuck many of the years, and maybe you've gotten stuck in this area, and that is you delegate something to your team, but they keep coming back to you for approval on decisions that they actually should make themselves, not because they're incapable or because they're not smart or because they don't have a degree, but because they actually don't have clarity on where the decision rights end and yours begin. This is so big. Where do decision rights end and where yours begin? So, what we talk about in terms of authorizing decisions, and you've got a lot of this already going on. So, some of this is in relationship to what we're talking about growing and scaling from this current level that you're at. And that is authorized decision rights mean that your team knows what can they decide on independently from this point forward, what requires your input, what can they make a decision on. Also, then, what criteria should they be using to make those new decisions? And sometimes, after we've grown, after we've built, after we've scaled, and we've hit a bit of a plateau, we start to forget that we have to now address those new authorized decision points. In practice, this might mean that, hey, listen, on this type of client transaction, up till this dollar threshold, you can decide. Over that, please bring it to me so we can discuss it. In terms of messaging, it could be like, hey, follow these frameworks as long as X, Y, or Z conditions come up, you decide. And if something changes in the direction of that, then let's come back and align first. Or another example could be on operations side. As long as X, Y, or Z fit within these parameters, you decide. But if it impacts our overall strategy, then maybe we should talk. When conditions exist and your team operates with confidence, then they know the boundaries, they know where they can go. And let me tell you, they're also liberated to feel better about their job and the job they're doing for the organization, for their customers, for the partners, for the vendors, whoever they're making these decisions with. Condition number 3 is documented judgment criteria. Documented judgment criteria. What does that mean? This is actually the more complicated layer of the whole thing, and one that many of us, including myself, I still struggle to get this fully documented. And that's when your team understands not just what you would decide, but how you would actually make the decision in the moment. Sometimes, again, we look at the checkbox, we look at the SOP, and we think we've delegated the ability to think about how you make the decision. This is the criteria you would use. This is the trade offs you would consider. These are the principles that guide your judgment. Truly the hardest part of this process. But in practice, here's what it could look like. When evaluating a partnership, here are the 5 criteria that must be in place that you must consider and weigh. Maybe when you're deciding if it's a tough client deal or maybe not quite a good client fit, you might have a framework that you teach them how to run through, whether this is a yes or whether this is a no. Maybe when you're thinking about different growth options in a specific area, maybe it's a new territory or what have you, you have a way to think about risk or the way to think about timing or the way to think about this strategic fit, let's say. But how you think about that is what becomes documented. And that is what judgment criteria being documented clearly is one of the hardest things to do, because even you know that in the last 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it's been that you've been building your business, some things just don't look the same, but there is a framework or a way you think about it. Okay. Your team, once they kind of understand how you make these decisions, they now are aligned with how you think, or better aligned, should I say, even in situations that they haven't encountered before. That's how trust really scales, because you're not just following instructions. They're not just following a playbook. They're not just following a checklist and a project management tool. They're operating from your decision-making foundation. This is the hardest part of everything we've been talking about, but that doesn't mean it can't and shouldn't be done. So here's the principle underneath all of this, right? So trust can scale when your expertise becomes transferable. We talked about that in one of the first episodes. Your judgment becomes repeatable when it's documented and put into a codification process or an infrastructure. And then commitment to the right outcome that you would do when your team is doing it can actually become more systematic, which is what a lot of us want when it comes to growing and scaling without us being in the way. So right now, all 3 of these things generally are trapped inside of the founders that we work with. And so it's when your expertise shows up when you show up, your judgment is deployed when you're in the room and you make the call, your commitment is visible when you're personally involved handling the work. But when you build these 3 conditions, this shared strategic foundation, this authorized decision-making model, and the most tough part, the documented judgment criteria, those 3 qualities become a part of the infrastructure of your organization. They exist whether you're there or not, right? That's what we've been talking about. That's what we've been building on. And that is, how do we extract all of this expertise that you have, all of this on the moment judgment decision? How do we transfer that, not just in the marketing world, not just in the sales world, but in the operations, in the fulfillment, in the industry marketplace that you're working in? We don't want your team pretending to be you. That's not what this is about. But because they're operating from your foundation. They're operating from your strategic frameworks. They should be operating from your guided principles. And that is what can help design this scalable trust model so that you can put the foot on the gas to your next level of growth, whether that's adding a lot more engine to your top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, whatever that looks like. That's what this becomes important for. One founder we worked with, I remember being exhausted because he's the final stop on almost every decision. Company was decent size. I mean, let's be clear, tons of, 50 people on the team, but it seemed like every decision, every pitch, every situation, somehow, every escalation somehow made it back to him. It wasn't because he didn't hire good people. He did. They were excellent. I mean, the bottom line was they lacked the confidence to speak on his behalf because they just didn't have the infrastructure to do it. And quite honestly, he lost some really good people because he would take it out on them because he hadn't done this work. So here's what we ended up working with him on as related specifically to his marketing, but he found so much benefit from this that it ended up spilling into the rest of his company. Was we helped him document his core frameworks, how he thought about diagnosing company problems, capturing his position arguments and how he thought through scenarios and gave the key distinctions. And we really recorded and archived his codified belief systems that he used in his approach. When it came to decisioning rights in his organization, we helped the team decide when they could make decisions on sales decisions independently, or when they could do it and when they needed him. They clarified when their marketing needed his input because there were too many times when he was in the middle of having an opinion about what types of things were going to go on in the campaigns, when they could just do things on their own or when they needed him. And of course, operational decisions, they found thresholds. And then when it came to the judgments, which again, no sugarcoating, this is the hard part, right? Because judgments can be based on all kinds of factors. But they developed the three core areas in their business, which had to do with partnership opportunities, had to do with prioritizing client requests, and it had to do with the trade-offs that sometimes could come up when they thought about growth and quality in their operation. I know that sounds esoteric, but I don't want to call out the company and get into the nitty gritty because it's their proprietary information. But once they put those conditions in place, everything changed, not overnight. They were able to see the sales team start to carry out conversations with confidence in a new kind of way because they now had the framework. The marketing team was able to stop running every piece of content, every campaign, every promotion through him because they had the decisioning rights. And the leadership team that was on the team, they were able to make some really tough judgment calls over the next 6 to 12 months that needed to be made because they had the criteria that he would use. And he stopped being and feeling like the bottleneck. I mean, he was in such stress by the growth of his business, meaning success was crushing him. And for the first time in years, he was able to step back and look at his distributed team. Again, he wasn't able to disappear and run off to an island somewhere, but they were not coming back to him for every single idea. And that's because they took the time to build the infrastructure and operate it at that level. So if you're feeling like this series has been speaking to you, then there are a couple of things that you might want to do to maybe diagnose this in your business, right? The question is, as we've said in other videos, have you diagnosed and documented your frameworks so that your team knows it without prompting? Are your clients saying to your team, oh, yeah, that's exactly what Bob, you, the founder, might have said, right? Are they making strategic decisions that align with your approach when you're not involved? When it comes to making decisions, are they making the right decisions within their scope of expertise and within the scope of allowance? Are they taking all of those decisions? Are you still seeing some of them creep back over to you? Are you being pulled still in directions where everyone seems to need your input? And does your team know where the boundaries are and can they operate within them is the key. Sometimes they know what they are. Sometimes they don't operate within them. The toughest part about this whole conversation, again, is the judgment criteria. One thing to look at is, can your team make the judgment calls when new situations pop up using your principles, your thought process? And that's hard. I've been running a marketing agency. I've been doing it 15 years. It's hard. Let me be clear. I got more marketing experience than most of our team, but I don't know everything. But the key is I have enough at bats in making critical decisions, and sometimes they don't. That's a refining process that I don't think ever ends. From a judgment standpoint, can they make decisions that feel aligned with how you'd approach them, even though they may not know exactly what you would do? And lastly, can your team explain their reasoning in using their criteria? One thing I love to do, and I've done for years, is when something happens in our business and I'm talking to the person about it, the first thing I ask them is, tell me your thought process about that. And I remember getting pushback and feedback from this years ago. And I'm like, I'm not asking them to tell me, we're not here to talk about whether it was right or wrong. We're here to talk about, just walk me through your thought process and your decisioning process, because that's one of the places where you can make this show up the most, and you have a good opportunity to change that. If you're missing any of these three ideas, then this idea of trust collapsing back to you because you're the expert, because you're the subject matter expertise, because your experience matters more than everyone else is where the bottleneck can be. And we don't want that to be the case, because especially when you have a talented team, it's just about taking the time to unpack your years of experience, your expertise, your frameworks. And by the way, while we tend to do this initially for the growth of the marketing, so that the marketing carries the voice of the founder, carries the voice of the brand, and we're trying to overcome this issue as we try to scale messaging when it comes to all of the things for related to growth. The big takeaway is this isn't just delegating. This is not about hiring more or better team members. There may be some issues there, but we'll assume you've got a great team. You wouldn't have got to the place where you are without it. We really talk about this as more of an infrastructure problem. This isn't a content creation problem. This isn't a marketing problem. This isn't a post everywhere problem. We're talking about building trust at scale, not just through delegation, but through infrastructure. When we build this strategic foundation, shared and authorized decisioning, and understanding what the documented judgment criteria can be, then trust in your business and your organization throughout multiple layers of operations, and especially including the marketing and growth side, becomes systematic and not personal. I can remember this one conversation with a founder who literally, I want to say that I just felt the weight of her comment because some of this wasn't in place. And she goes, I just don't know if I even want to grow this thing anymore. And a lot of it was because it was the grit, it was the grind. And she said to me something, and it still breaks my heart. She said, I've built this business on the back of my reputation and my experience and my expertise. And now I'm trapped. And the interesting part about that conversation is it was a moment in time with her perspective. It was a false belief that she carried as true. We ended up not being able to help her, not just with the marketing, because that's what she came to us about, but because we don't grow marketing. We don't do marketing with clients until we know that their infrastructure is in place, not because we're an operational guru, but because we know that just adding more revenue, more leads, more qualified pipeline isn't going to fix the problem if systemically there are some other challenges down the line. But anyway, I digress a little bit, but this is what we've covered in this series, and I hope you found some sort of value in it. In episode 1, we talked about trust not transferring just strictly through delegation. It transfers through this codifying of your expertise. And the funny thing is your voice becomes an asset, not activity. We're not asking you to be jumping on TikTok and Instagram and all these things. No, there's a very specific way where you can explain, not create content. Episode number 2 in this series, we talked about how to extract your expertise in a couple of layers. Number 1 was positioning, frameworks, and number 3 was beliefs, right? So we're not, again, trying to get you to become the person who picks up the camera and is running around shooting videos for social media. No, we want you to explain. In video number 3 in this series, we talked about clarity and how that compounds over activity or volume, right? And the 3 areas of clarity that we talked about are positioning, language, and beliefs. And in this video, we wrapped up trust and scaling. And how do we get that scaled? When we have a shared strategic foundation, when we have an authorized decision process amongst the team members, and some sort of documented judgment criteria. We use all of this in our world, and we call it the trust flywheel system. It's not just a content strategy. It is a marketing strategy. It is a sales strategy. It is a communication strategy. It is really a strategy that over the years have been applicable to the growth of many of the businesses that we've worked with, where we don't cover all of this. We actually help on the marketing side and help scale the marketing. But it's designed significantly and specifically for founders who've built significant businesses and need to scale beyond their personal presence in the marketplace. So if you have enjoyed this series, and if you haven't watched all the videos, there are links down below. You can catch the others in the series. If this has been valuable to you, we hope you will download the Trust Flywheel map, which will be a link down below. It shows you how to extract, codify, clarify, distribute, and put all of this system into one process that'll scale your voice, your authority, your trust without requiring more of you. You can download that in the show notes below. And if you're ready to stop being the most valuable bottleneck in the company, with respect, believe me, I have been that person many a times over the years, and I'm not so sure I'm not sometimes, even when it comes to shooting this show. If you're ready to build an infrastructure, or you want to have a conversation about that, how to build trust at scale, then we'd invite you to have that conversation. There should be a link somewhere down below. Otherwise, thank you for being a part of this series. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.